All right, good morning, guys and ladies. Hope you all are doing well. Today, I wanted to drop a real quick video, get into some of the idiosyncrasies on monopolies, on pure monopolies. Specifically, I wanted to talk about the break-even graph, the loss graph, and then also how we could compare a deadweight, or rather a perfect competition graph to a monopoly graph in the same graph and show the deadweight loss to society on there. That probably all sounds a little intimidating. If you understood the first graph on monopolies, you should be fine. So let's go through this real quick and see if you guys have any questions. By the way, please make sure if you guys are having questions on these YouTube videos, drop them in the comments, drop them as questions either via email, Google Classroom, because I'm not hearing a whole lot there, but I'm thinking that some of you might have questions. So if you have questions, please contact me. Okay, so first thing we always do on Monopoly, we're going to have our DARP, which is downward sloping. Then we're going to have our MR, which is going to come somewhere in between the vertical axis and the DARP. We've got our MC curve, which is that Nike swoosh guy. We also always know where MR and MC are equal, that's going to be our quantity right there, our profit maximizing quantity. So then the last curve that we need to look at on this is going to be our ATC. Now, if this was going to be a profit graph, what we talked about last time, we had the ATC, didn't have to be below this, could have been anywhere really below the demand curve. So could be here, could be here, could be right through that point, didn't matter. As long as it's below demand, it's a profit. So a loss graph is basically saying the ATC is fully above the demand curve, that there's no part of ATC below the demand curve. So a way of looking at that, let's do our ATC right here. Okay, if this is our ATC, then what we show in terms of our loss graph, we go from this point, we go up to our demand, because that's our AR, that's our revenue, that's what's coming in, that's how much money I'm making. All right, and then this is our average cost, that's how much is going out per unit. So I go up to that, and now this little guy right here, that is the amount of money that I am losing. And so again, I connect it over here, and now I've got this little bitty rectangle, this real thin little rectangle guy right here that represents our loss. Now you may have noticed, wow, that looks like a pretty small loss in comparison to a lot of the other graphs we may have done. Yeah, it is, and one of the reasons pure monopolies in general don't lose money. Very seldom are you going to see a pure monopoly that really suffers a loss. So it's possible that this could happen, but not very likely that you could see something like this. Okay, so that's the loss graph there. We've done the profit, now we've done the loss, so the next question is, okay, what about the break even? Well, the break even graph, and I'm not going to redraw the whole thing here, I'm just going to kind of sort of modify this just a little bit. Okay, again, it just depends on the positioning of the ATC. So what we want to do on our break-even graph here is we go ahead, we take our MR equals MC, we go up to where it hits the AR or the demand curve, we go up to that point that we just had, right? Now what we want to do is make sure that the ATC just goes through that point, that it never really goes below that point, but there is, at that point, it just sort of hits it. So as an example here, I'm going to, again, I'll pick a spot here, like maybe here to draw my ATC, something like that. And so now when I come over here, what I'm going to do is have it just clip that just like that. And that's going to be my break even. That at that point, my cost and my revenue is the same, okay? At that point, cost and revenue is going to be the same. That is my break-even graph. All right, so those are the three main ones. We did the profit in the last video. We've got the loss and now the break-even here. But there's one other little thing I want to show you on this that AP loves to do, and that's comparing a perfect competition graph to a monopoly graph on the same graph, on the monopoly. And you may look at that and go, oh my gosh, what the heck is he talking about? I promise it's honestly not that bad, okay? Basically, and we can take, by the way, I'm not even going to change the positioning of the ATC graph on here. It's not necessary, so I'm just going to leave this as a break even for right now. Again, it's much more likely that you would see a profit graph for monopoly, but in what we're talking about here in a second, doesn't really affect it. All right, so we know in a monopoly, or really in any graph, you're always going to maximize profit where MR equals MC. Here's MC, here's MR, here's where they come together. That's the point at which you would produce in terms of quantity. We further know that the price for this, you'd have to go from this point and go up to the demand curve and go over to show the price. And the reason being the price is on the demand curve. That's the in dark, right? So I'm just going to abbreviate here. We're going to call this PM for monopoly and QM for monopoly. Okay, now what I want you to do is think a little bit about perfect competition. You may say, well, wait, I know this is not a perfect competition graph, it's a monopoly graph. And you're right, and we know that for a couple reasons. Number one, no side by side. Number two, the fact that the demand curve is downward sloping. So we have several ways or several reasons that we know that this is monopoly and not perfect competition here. All right, the next thing that we want to look at, though, to say, where would perfect competition be if we were producing on this? So what is different about perfect competition than monopoly? Well, one thing is that perfect competition is the only firm, or it's the only market structure that is socially efficient. It's the only one that's socially efficient. So I go, all right, cool. Socially efficient, what does that mean? If I go back to that 4-column chart that we did back when we were actually around each other, 4-column chart there said, okay, socially efficient is where P equals MC. All right, so let's look here. All right, here's my P, here's my price, dark. Here's my MC. This, where those two are equal, that is where a perfectly competitive firm would produce. So what we see is that, and I'll instead of P, let me put it as C for competitive. So QC for competitive. What we see is in terms of quantity. A competitive firm will produce more, or a competitive market will produce more of an item than a monopoly. And that makes sense, because you know how many firms we have in perfect competition? Thousands. You know how many firms we have in a monopoly? One. So it makes sense that we would have more quantity being produced in a competitive market than in a monopoly market. What about the price? Well, the price is already right there. We don't have to go up to anything. The price is right here. And so I'll call this PC. My competitive price is lower than a monopoly. Again, that makes sense. Perfect competition is price takers. Pure monopoly are price makers. Also, if there's competition, everyone's competing over price. They're trying to lower the price. If it's a monopoly, you ain't competing with anybody. You can charge whatever price you want. So a pure monopoly charges a higher price than perfect competition, and it has fewer quantity supplied, or lesser quantity supplied than perfect competition. So occasionally, AP may ask, all right, if we're comparing these two, is there a deadweight loss to society because of this being a monopoly market instead of a perfect competition? And yeah, there is. And here's the cool thing. We can see a couple of little triangles right here, can't we? We see a couple of triangles, which we know a deadweight loss is always going to be a triangle. So essentially what we want to do here is we take a look at, there's the difference in price, here's the difference in quantity, and we sort of bring those together. So I know it's tempting to go with that whole triangle right there, but we're actually only going to do the top part. In fact, let me switch up the colors here to make it stand out a little bit. This is my difference in price, right? So let me draw a little line here for my difference in price. This is my difference in quantity. Those two right there. And now we just connect them. And that is my deadweight loss. Okay, I know that even though this wasn't a super long video, there's a lot of content there. We're going to have some practice with it. If you have questions, do not wait. Ask me once you've seen the video. Ask your questions, okay? I don't mind answering them at all. It's one of the reasons I'm not trying to overload you guys too terribly with work, is because I know that this content is fairly complicated, and I want it to sink in, and I want you guys to ask questions. So I am more than happy to answer anything you may have. Hopefully, you all are having a great day and a great weekend, and we'll see you all soon.